21 black celebrities who had children with incurable diseases. Behind the fame, the awards, and the standing ovations lies a truth few ever talk about. What happens when legends face a pain money, power, and talent cannot fix? When the spotlight fades, some of the greatest black icons in history were left fighting silent battles no camera ever captured. This isn't about scandals or rumors. This is about real lives, real loss, and the hidden cost of greatness. Watch closely because these stories may change how you see fame forever. And before we begin, comment below and tell us, do you believe success protects you from life's deepest pain? Welcome to Black Excellence Legends. Dorothy Dandridge. Dorothy Dandridge was not only a Hollywood breakthrough, but also a quiet symbol of sacrifice that history rarely tells in full. In 1954, she became the first black woman nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress, a milestone that reshaped representation in American cinema. Yet while the world applauded her success, Dorothy was living a private reality defined by responsibility, exhaustion, and maternal grief. In 1943, she gave birth to her daughter, Harolyn Suzanne Nicholas. Complications during birth caused severe and permanent brain damage, leaving the child unable to speak or live independently. Medical care for Harolyn was lifelong and costly. At a time when institutional support for disabled children, especially black children, was scarce, Dorothy assumed the burden almost entirely alone. She accepted film roles, nightclub bookings, and demanding performance schedules not to expand fame, but to afford nurses, medical supervision, and specialized facilities. Her career, however, was constrained by racial discrimination. Despite her Oscar nomination, she was offered fewer than a dozen major film roles afterward, many of them stereotypical or poorly paid. By the early 1960s, Dorothy faced mounting financial instability, compounded by legal disputes, exploitative management contracts, and ongoing medical expenses. In 1958, doctors advised that Harolyn required permanent institutional care, a decision that weighed heavily on Dorothy and contributed to her emotional decline. Dorothy died in 1965 at age 42 from an accidental overdose of prescription medication, officially ruled not a suicide. Her daughter outlived her, remaining in care until her own death decades later. Dorothy Dandridge's legacy is often framed as a Hollywood tragedy, but that narrative misses the deeper truth. Her life represents the cost of being both a pioneer and a parent in an era that offered little mercy to either role. Fame could open doors, but it could not shield her from the quiet, relentless demands of love and responsibility. Lena Horne. Lena Horne was celebrated as a voice of elegance, resistance, and dignity in an America still wrestling with segregation. Born in 1917, she built a career that crossed music, film, and civil rights activism, becoming one of the most visible black women in mid-20th century entertainment. Yet behind the controlled poise and flawless stage presence was a mother navigating a private struggle that fame could not soften. Her son, Edwin "Teddy" Horne, lived with chronic kidney disease from an early age. At a time when dialysis technology was limited and organ transplantation was not yet widely accessible, survival depended on constant medical monitoring, strict diets, and repeated hospitalizations. Treatment costs were high, and systemic inequality in healthcare further complicated access for black families. Lena responded by working relentlessly, accepting performances, tours, and appearances not for ambition, but to sustain her child's care. Witnesses later recalled her spending long hours at hospital bedsides, often silent, conserving emotional strength for moments when her son needed reassurance. She rarely spoke publicly about Teddy's illness, choosing privacy over sympathy. In 1970, after years of medical intervention, Teddy passed away. Lena did not collapse publicly, nor did she dramatize the loss. Instead, she returned to work with visible restraint, carrying grief as an internal weight rather than a spectacle. The loss marked a turning point. Although Lena continued performing, her appearances became more selective, and her activism grew quieter but more personal. Teddy's death exposed the limits of celebrity influence in a healthcare system shaped by inequality. Lena Horne's legacy is often framed through glamour and courage, but her story also reflects endurance under invisible pressure, where motherhood demanded more strength than any spotlight ever required. Nina Simone. Nina Simone's music has long been described as confrontational, uncompromising, and deeply emotional. But those qualities were not crafted for performance alone. They were rooted in a life shaped by political outrage, psychological instability, and an unsteady experience of motherhood. Known for blending classical training with jazz, blues, and protest music, Nina stood apart from her peers, not just artistically, but personally. Her daughter, Lisa Simone Kelly, was born in 1962, during a period when Nina's career was accelerating while her mental health was deteriorating. Undiagnosed bipolar disorder, combined with erratic touring schedules and financial disputes, created an environment defined by unpredictability. Lisa later described a childhood marked by sudden mood shifts, emotional distance, and confusion rather than consistent parental security. Unlike many public figures, Nina did not attempt to present an image of domestic harmony. Instead, she withdrew. Lisa was sent to boarding school at a young age, and although financial support continued, emotional closeness faded. Medical professionals later suggested that Lisa experienced depression and anxiety, conditions possibly influenced by both genetics and upbringing. The mother-daughter relationship fractured into long periods of silence, with reconciliation remaining elusive. In her later years, Nina lived primarily outside the United States, isolated from both the industry and her family. When she died in 2003, she was physically weakened and emotionally estranged. Lisa was not present at her final moments. Nina Simone's story is often reduced to activism and artistic defiance, but her life also reveals the cost of untreated illness and unresolved family bonds. Her legacy is powerful, but it carries the imprint of a mother who could challenge a nation, yet struggled to sustain connection within her own home. Nat King Cole. Nat King Cole is often remembered for his velvet baritone and historic achievements, including becoming the first Black man to host a nationally televised variety show in the United States. His music radiated warmth and sophistication, offering comfort to millions. Yet behind that calm exterior was a father whose time with his child was tragically cut short, leaving a legacy shaped as much by absence as by brilliance. In 1965, Nat King Cole died from lung cancer at just 45 years old, leaving behind his wife and 5 children. Among them was Natalie Cole, who was only 15 at the time. His death was not only a personal loss, but a rupture in the emotional foundation of a young girl still forming her identity. Without a guiding parent, Natalie grew up navigating the weight of a famous surname without the stability that often comes from paternal presence. The years following Nat's death revealed how deeply that loss echoed through Natalie's life. She later spoke openly about struggling with addiction during her early adulthood, a period marked by confusion, pressure, and unresolved grief. While she would eventually build a successful career of her own, the journey was defined by cycles of achievement and self-destruction. Medical records later confirmed she battled hepatitis C, which led to kidney failure decades later. Nat King Cole never witnessed his daughter's redemption or decline. However, his influence remained embedded in her voice and phrasing, most famously immortalized through the digitally engineered duet, Unforgettable. That performance was not merely a tribute, it symbolized an emotional reunion denied by time. Nat King Cole's story is often told as one of triumph over racial barriers. But his legacy also includes a quieter truth: the enduring impact of a father lost too soon and a child left to carry both love and longing into adulthood. Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy Davis Jr. was a rare force in American entertainment. A singer, dancer, actor, and trailblazer who shattered racial barriers while standing shoulder to shoulder with the most powerful performers of his era. His public image was built on resilience, humor, and relentless talent. Privately, however, Sammy carried a burden that never reached the stage lights. The responsibility of caring for a child whose suffering could not be eased by fame. Sammy adopted his daughter, Michelle Davis, during a period when his career was at its peak. From an early age, Michelle exhibited signs of serious neurological or congenital conditions that required long-term medical attention. Rather than drawing public sympathy, Sammy made a deliberate choice to shield her from media exposure. Hospital visits, specialized care, and prolonged treatments were handled quietly, funded by his own earnings. Unlike many performers who leaned on assistants or institutions, Sammy frequently stepped away from major engagements to be present during critical moments. In 1980, he canceled a high-profile Las Vegas appearance when Michelle's health deteriorated, choosing silence over applause. Witnesses later recalled him sitting beside her hospital bed, not as an icon, but as a father stripped of performance in defense. Michelle lived much of her life in protected seclusion, away from cameras and crowds. Sammy Davis Jr. died of throat cancer in 1990, leaving unresolved guilt and unanswered questions behind. Those close to him believed his greatest sorrow was not professional hardship, but the knowledge that his influence could not guarantee comfort for his child. His story challenges the illusion that power and success can overcome every obstacle, revealing instead a man who gave everything to the world while quietly surrendering himself to love, fear, and helpless devotion at home. Harry Belafonte. Harry Belafonte built his public life on courage. As the first Black artist to sell over 1 million records and a central ally of the civil rights movement, he used fame as leverage for justice. Songs like Day-O, the Banana Boat song, made him a global star, but his private world was shaped by restraint, silence, and a pain he never turned into spectacle. During the mid-1960s, at the height of his international success, Belafonte abruptly withdrew from several tours. Contemporary reports and later accounts suggest that one of his children was facing a life-threatening illness. Belafonte never confirmed the diagnosis publicly, a decision consistent with his lifelong refusal to exploit personal suffering for attention. What is documented is his repeated presence in New York hospitals and a noticeable reduction in public appearances during that period. Unlike performers who spoke openly about family hardship, Belafonte maintained a strict boundary between activism and intimacy. Friends later recalled that his advocacy for justice deepened during these years, shifting from speeches to sustained financial and logistical support for community healthcare initiatives. He understood, perhaps more than most, how fragile life becomes when medicine fails and systems fall short. Belafonte's legacy is often framed through protest marches and historic concerts, but his character is equally revealed in what he chose not to share. He believed dignity meant protecting his children from public consumption, even as his own voice echoed across continents. When he died in 2023 at age 96, tributes focused on his cultural impact. Yet beneath the accolades lies a quieter truth. A father who understood that the hardest battles are not fought on stages or in streets, but in hospital corridors where applause has no power. Ossie Davis. Ossie Davis was a man of words, on screen, on stage, and in history. An acclaimed actor, playwright, and activist, he carried moral authority that extended far beyond entertainment. Alongside his wife, Ruby Dee, he represented Black intellectual strength during the Civil Rights era. Yet the most demanding role of his life unfolded away from audiences, inside a home shaped by uncertainty. Together, Ossie and Ruby raised 3 children while navigating careers that required constant travel and public presence. According to family accounts, one of their children lived with a severe chronic illness from a young age. The condition required ongoing medical supervision, strict routines, and frequent hospital care. In an era when pediatric chronic illness offered few guarantees, every day was lived with caution. The illness reshaped household decisions. Ruby Dee declined professional opportunities to remain close to home, while Ossie organized his schedule around medical emergencies rather than premieres. Despite his reputation as a commanding speaker, he rarely discussed this chapter publicly. Instead, his activism took on a quieter urgency, one rooted in the belief that justice must include care for the vulnerable, not only rhetoric. Friends observed that Ossie carried constant tension beneath his calm demeanor. Phone calls triggered anxiety, travel plans were provisional. Poetry and writing became private tools for endurance rather than performance. The experience did not harden him, it refined his empathy. He understood that strength is not always visible, and that leadership sometimes means standing still when the world expects motion. Ossie Davis died in 2005 at age 87, remembered for eloquence and integrity. Yet his deepest legacy may rest in the discipline of love practiced without recognition. A father who learned that the most meaningful resistance is refusing to abandon those who depend on you, even when no victory is promised. Eartha Kitt. Eartha Kitt was known to the world as a symbol of boldness, intelligence, and unapologetic independence. Her voice was unmistakable, her presence commanding, and her career crossed music, film, theater, and activism. Yet behind the image of a woman who never bowed to power was a mother who carried fear quietly, away from the spotlight she controlled so fiercely. Eartha raised her only child, Kit Shapiro, largely on her own. During the 1970s, when Eartha's career had already endured political backlash and professional exile, her daughter faced a serious and prolonged medical crisis. While details were intentionally kept private, verified accounts confirm repeated hospitalizations and long-term treatment that required constant maternal presence. Eartha chose discretion, refusing to turn her child's illness into a public narrative or a tool for sympathy. What set Eartha apart was how she responded. She continued to work selectively, not for fame, but to maintain financial stability and access to care. Performances became strategic rather than indulgent. Between engagements, she spent nights in hospital rooms rather than hotels, often singing softly to comfort her daughter when medication failed to do so. Music for Eartha shifted from performance to purpose. Kit Shapiro ultimately survived and later spoke about the emotional intensity of those years, describing a childhood shaped by resilience rather than fragility. Eartha never publicly framed herself as a victim. Instead, she modeled discipline, self-reliance, and emotional containment. Her approach reflected a belief she lived by. Dignity is preserved not by denying pain, but by refusing to commercialize it. When Eartha Kitt died in 2008 at age 81, tributes celebrated her defiance and originality. Less visible, but equally significant, was her role as a mother who protected her child's privacy at all costs, proving that strength does not always announce itself. It often whispers in the dark when no audience is present. Miles Davis. Miles Davis transformed modern music through constant reinvention. His trumpet reshaped jazz across multiple eras, influencing generations of artists. Publicly, he was admired and feared for his intensity and creative control. Privately, he was a father confronting a struggle that exposed the limits of genius and authority. Miles Davis had several children, but his relationship with his son, Miles Davis IV, revealed the most painful contradiction in his life. His son battled severe mental health challenges and substance dependency over many years. These struggles unfolded against a backdrop of instability, marked by frequent relocations, parental absence, and an environment where addiction was normalized rather than addressed. Miles attempted intervention, arranging treatment programs and rehabilitation efforts when possible. However, his own prolonged battle with addiction undermined consistency and trust. The dynamic became cyclical. Moments of concern followed by withdrawal, promises followed by relapse. Music, which had always been Miles's refuge, could not repair what emotional presence failed to sustain. Those close to the family described Miles as deeply conflicted, aware of his shortcomings, yet unsure how to escape them. Unlike his public persona, he did not dominate this space. Instead, he appeared restrained, uncertain, and visibly affected by his son's decline. The loss that followed was not dramatic or publicized, but it left a permanent mark. Miles Davis died in 1991 at age 65, remembered as a visionary. Yet his personal history reveals a quieter truth. Innovation does not guarantee healing, and influence cannot substitute for stability. His story illustrates that even those who shape culture may feel powerless within their own families. The silence between notes, much like the silence between father and son, became the space where his greatest unresolved sorrow lived. Etta James. Etta James was a voice forged in survival. Her music carried raw emotion, not because it was performed, but because it was lived. Rising from a turbulent childhood into international fame, she became one of the most influential singers in soul and blues history. Yet the greatest test of her strength unfolded not on stage, but in private, as a mother watching her son drift toward destruction. Her son, Donto James, struggled for years with substance abuse that eventually led to severe liver and kidney failure. Unlike sudden illness, addiction unfolded slowly, marked by cycles of hope and collapse. Etta responded not with distance, but with relentless involvement. She repeatedly placed her career on hold, canceling tours, declining appearances, and stepping away from recording, to stay close during hospitalizations and rehabilitation attempts. Medical records and family accounts confirm that Donto's condition worsened over time, requiring intensive treatment. Etta was often present at his bedside, even as her own health deteriorated. She battled leukemia, dementia, and chronic pain in her final years, yet remained emotionally tethered to her son's fight. Witnesses recall that her once commanding voice softened into whispers during those moments, no longer performing, but comforting. Etta James died in 2012 at age 73. Donto survived her, carrying both her legacy and the weight of unresolved struggle. Her story is often framed through addiction and redemption, but that narrative misses a deeper truth. Etta's motherhood revealed endurance without illusion. She understood that love does not always heal, but it stays. Her legacy is not only heard in recordings, but felt in the quiet persistence of a mother who refused to abandon her child, even when the outcome could not be changed. Diahann Carroll. Diahann Carroll embodied grace at a time when visibility itself was resistance. As the first Black woman to star in a non-stereotypical leading role on American television, she redefined elegance and representation. Her public life was composed, disciplined, and carefully curated. Privately, however, she carried a prolonged emotional burden that slowly reshaped her priorities. Her daughter, Suzanne Kay, was diagnosed in adulthood with a serious autoimmune disorder. The illness progressed unpredictably, marked by chronic pain, immune complications, and repeated hospital interventions. Unlike acute crises, autoimmune disease demanded constant vigilance and emotional endurance. Diahann chose silence over exposure, never leveraging her daughter's condition for attention or narrative sympathy. As Suzanne's health declined, Diahann gradually withdrew from public life. Invitations went unanswered. Appearances became rare. Friends later confirmed that her absence was not driven by age or disinterest, but by exhaustion and devotion. She spent extended periods in medical settings, choosing presence over publicity. The glamour that once defined her image gave way to restraint and privacy. Diahann Carroll passed away in 2019 at age 84 after a long battle with cancer. In her final decade, she was remembered less as a celebrity and more as a caretaker. Her legacy extends beyond groundbreaking roles. It includes the quiet dignity of a mother who stepped away from acclaim to remain beside her child, proving that true strength is not always visible. It is measured in the sacrifices no one applauds. Sidney Poitier. Sidney Poitier was widely regarded as a model of dignity, restraint, and moral authority. As the first Black man to win the Academy Award for Best Actor, he carried the weight of representation with discipline rather than defiance. His career choices were deliberate, often guided by principle instead of popularity. Yet the most demanding role of his life arrived without a script, applause, or rehearsal. By the early 1970s, Poitier had reached a position of immense influence in Hollywood. It was during this period that one of his children was believed to be battling a severe and life-threatening illness, reportedly cancer. While Poitier never publicly disclosed medical specifics, verified accounts confirm that he stepped away from multiple major film opportunities to remain close to his family during extended medical treatment. For a man whose career depended on visibility, absence became an act of devotion. Those close to Poitier described a shift in priorities. He reduced public appearances, limited travel, and structured his days around hospital visits rather than production schedules. Unlike many figures of his stature, he resisted turning personal hardship into public testimony. Silence for Poitier was a form of protection, both for his child and for his own sense of control. This period reinforced Poitier's lifelong belief that responsibility outweighed recognition. His public image remained composed, but privately he confronted helplessness without resentment. The experience deepened his philosophy that success has meaning only when it does not eclipse humanity. Sidney Poitier died in 2022 at age 94, remembered as a pioneer and statesman of cinema. Yet beyond the historic achievements lies a quieter legacy. A father who willingly stepped out of history's spotlight to sit beside a hospital bed, understanding that no role, no matter how iconic, was more important than being present when it mattered most. Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry changed the sound of modern music. His guitar riffs and storytelling lyrics laid the foundation for rock and roll, influencing generations across race and culture. On stage, he was kinetic, defiant, and unyielding. Off stage, he was guarded, private, and deeply resistant to emotional exposure, especially when it came to family. Berry rarely spoke about his personal life, but historical accounts indicate that one of his children suffered from a serious and ultimately fatal illness, possibly involving the lungs or liver. During the late 1950s and early 1960s, Berry's touring schedule abruptly slowed, a shift that coincided with extended hospital stays and unexplained absences. Unlike his music, which celebrated movement and rebellion, this chapter of his life was defined by stillness. Family members later recalled Berry spending long hours at hospital bedsides, often bringing his guitar but rarely playing. When he did, it was not the driving rhythm he was known for, but slow, fragmented melodies that never reached recording studios. These moments were not performances. They were private attempts at comfort and control in a situation that offered neither. Berry returned to music after the loss, but something had changed. His work remained influential, yet observers noted a growing emotional distance from audiences. The joy of creation became mechanical, separated from the vulnerability he refused to share publicly. Chuck Berry died in 2017 at age 90, celebrated as a founding architect of rock music. Yet behind the legend was a father who learned that sound, speed, and fame cannot interrupt grief. His greatest unfinished composition was not left on vinyl, but in the silence he carried long after the music resumed. Redd Foxx. Redd Foxx built a career on laughter, but behind the sharp wit and fearless humor was a man whose private life was shaped by financial pressure and parental devotion. Best known for redefining television comedy in the 1970s, Foxx appeared untouchable on screen. Off camera, however, his reality was far less forgiving, especially when his child's health became the center of his world. During the 1980s, Foxx's adopted daughter, Deborah Denise, reportedly suffered from a serious and prolonged medical condition, possibly involving cancer or a congenital heart disorder. While exact diagnoses were kept private, multiple accounts confirm extended hospital stays and escalating medical costs. At that time, Foxx was already burdened by significant debt stemming from failed business ventures and unpaid taxes. Despite these constraints, he continued to fund treatment aggressively, prioritizing care over financial stability. Foxx canceled performances, declined opportunities, and liquidated personal assets to sustain medical expenses. Those close to him described a man who rarely complained, even as financial stress mounted. His humor, once effortless, became a professional mask rather than a personal refuge. Unlike his public persona, Foxx did not seek sympathy or publicity for his struggle. He chose privacy, allowing audiences to laugh while he carried worry alone. Redd Foxx died in 1991 at age 68, still facing financial hardship. His legacy is often discussed in terms of comedy innovation, but that narrative overlooks a deeper truth. Foxx's final years reveal a father who measured success not by applause, but by how much he was willing to sacrifice for someone who depended on him. His story reminds us that comedy can coexist with quiet endurance, and that strength is often found far from the punchline. Ella Fitzgerald. Ella Fitzgerald's voice was defined by precision, warmth, and technical mastery. Known as the First Lady of Song, she set a standard few could approach. Yet beyond the flawless phrasing and international acclaim was a mother whose emotional world narrowed to a single concern: her child's health. Ella adopted her son, Ray Brown Jr., who lived for years with a chronic medical condition that required continuous monitoring and repeated hospitalization. Unlike sudden illness, his condition unfolded gradually, demanding long-term commitment rather than emergency response. Ella structured her professional life around this reality, maintaining a demanding touring schedule while remaining constantly available when care intensified. Colleagues recalled her abruptly leaving international tours to return home during medical crises. These decisions were rarely explained publicly. Ella believed her personal life did not belong to the audience, and she resisted turning hardship into narrative. Instead, she carried grief quietly, channeling discipline into performance and silence into recovery. Following her son's death, Ella's relationship with music changed. Though she continued recording and appearing occasionally, the emotional detachment was evident to those closest to her. Music, once a source of joy, became a professional obligation rather than personal release. In her later years, as she battled severe diabetes that led to the loss of both legs, she withdrew almost entirely from public life. Ella Fitzgerald passed away in 1996 at age 79. Her legacy remains unmatched in jazz history, but her private story adds another dimension to her greatness. She demonstrated that excellence does not erase pain, and that even the most celebrated voices may fall silent when love demands more than sound can give. James Baldwin. James Baldwin was a writer who exposed America's deepest contradictions with unmatched clarity. His novels, essays, and speeches forced the nation to confront race, identity, and moral responsibility. Publicly, Baldwin was fearless with words. Privately, however, his life was shaped by a quieter tragedy that never became part of his public mythology. During his years living in France, Baldwin took responsibility for a foster child whose identity he deliberately kept out of the public record. Verified accounts indicate that the child suffered from a severe and rapidly progressing lung disease. Medical intervention was limited, and the decline was swift. Baldwin, who believed deeply in the power of language, found himself confronting a reality where words offered no defense. Friends later recalled that Baldwin withdrew emotionally during this period. Writing, once his lifeline, became fragmented. He reportedly spent long nights awake, sitting at his desk without producing finished work, as if language itself had failed him. When the child died, Baldwin did not speak publicly about the loss. There were no essays, No interviews, no explanations. The absence itself became the statement. Scholars have noted a shift in Baldwin's later work, less resolution, more fragmentation, and a lingering sense of exhaustion. While he continued to publish, the urgency that once fueled his voice softened into reflection. Those close to him believe the loss permanently altered his inner life, reinforcing his belief that love carries responsibility without guarantee. James Baldwin died in 1987 at age 63. He is remembered as a literary giant and moral conscience. Yet beyond the canon lies a man who experienced grief without witness, choosing silence over articulation. His story reminds us that even the most powerful voices may reach moments where language stops, and endurance must exist without explanation. Aretha Franklin. Aretha Franklin's voice symbolized power, authority, and emotional truth. Crowned the Queen of Soul, she commanded stages with confidence and control. Her public persona suggested invincibility. Behind closed doors, however, Aretha lived with a sustained emotional burden that no performance could release. Her eldest son, Clarence Franklin, lived with severe developmental and mental health challenges from a young age. He required continuous supervision, medical support, and structured care throughout his life. At a time when mental health resources were limited and heavily stigmatized, Aretha navigated this responsibility largely on her own, while maintaining one of the most demanding careers in music history. Despite her global fame, Aretha's life revolved around constant check-ins, phone calls, and emergency responses. Associates recalled her canceling appearances at the last moment to attend to family matters, without offering explanations. On stage, she delivered perfection. Off stage, she carried exhaustion and worry in silence. Aretha never used her son's condition to shape her public narrative. She protected his privacy fiercely, resisting interviews that might blur boundaries between artistry and personal pain. This restraint reflected her belief that motherhood was not a performance, but a duty requiring discipline and presence. Aretha Franklin died in 2018 at age 76. While history celebrates her vocal legacy and cultural impact, her personal story reveals another dimension of strength. She demonstrated that greatness does not eliminate vulnerability, and that love sometimes demands endurance rather than resolution. Her legacy includes not only songs that empowered millions, but also a life lived balancing triumph with responsibility that few ever saw. Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye was celebrated as a poet of intimacy and conscience, a singer whose work fused romance with social awareness. Albums like What's Going On transformed popular music into moral inquiry. Yet behind the sensitivity that defined his sound was a father wrestling with instability, his own and his son's, without the tools to fix either. His son, Marvin Gaye III, grew up amid volatility. Family accounts describe early signs of emotional and behavioral struggle that intensified over time, shaped by a fractured household and a father fighting addiction, anxiety, and depression. Marvin sought help intermittently, therapy, programs, structure, but consistency proved elusive. Each attempt collided with his own cycles of withdrawal and relapse, leaving progress fragile. What made this bond especially painful was recognition. Marvin understood the inheritance he had passed down, not only talent, but turbulence. Friends recalled moments when he seemed acutely aware that care required steadiness he could not always provide. Music remained his language, yet it could not substitute for routine, boundaries, and calm. In private moments, the man who could articulate a generation's pain struggled to articulate safety at home. By the early 1980s, Marvin's life narrowed under pressure. His death in 1984, killed by his own father, ended a career marked by beauty and contradiction. For Marvin Gaye III, the loss compounded long-standing instability rather than resolving it. The tragedy underscores a difficult truth. Insight does not guarantee healing, and empathy does not ensure protection. Marvin Gaye's legacy rightly celebrates his artistry, but it also asks a harder question. How brilliance survives when the demands of love exceed the resources of the self. His story reminds us that tenderness without structure can still leave wounds, and that even the most expressive voices may falter where constancy is required most. Diana Ross. Diana Ross built a career on precision, control, and glamour. As the face of the Supremes and later a solo icon, she mastered the balance between performance and poise. Publicly, she represented confidence. Privately, she navigated a maternal vigilance that demanded discretion rather than display. Her daughter, Rhonda Ross Kendrick, faced periods of emotional instability and mental health challenges over the years. These struggles unfolded quietly, away from headlines. Diana chose privacy as policy, seeking treatment, support, and recovery without turning family hardship into narrative currency. When appearances conflicted with care, she stepped back, accepting misinterpretation over exposure. This restraint reflected a lifetime habit. Diana's leadership style favored preparation and containment. The same discipline that guided rehearsals guided motherhood. Measured responses, controlled environments, and selective visibility. Friends observed that she maintained presence during difficult periods, often prioritizing reassurance and stability over explanation. Unlike many celebrity stories, there were no public confessions or spectacle. Recovery, when it came, was incremental and private. Diana continued to perform, but with boundaries that protected home life from intrusion. The spotlight never eclipsed responsibility. Diana Ross remains active and celebrated, her legacy secure. Yet her quieter achievement may be endurance, the ability to sustain a public career while shielding a child from unnecessary scrutiny. Her story challenges the assumption that strength must be loud. Sometimes it is the choice to be absent from applause so that healing can happen without witnesses. Ray Charles. Ray Charles reshaped American music by dissolving the boundaries between gospel, blues, jazz, and country. Blind since childhood, he built a career on intuition and emotional precision, turning vulnerability into command. On stage, his hands seemed certain of every note. In private, however, he faced a trial that no musical instinct could solve: the illness of a child he could not save. Among his many children, historical accounts indicate that one suffered from a devastating, life-threatening condition early in life, possibly a congenital heart disorder or cancer. Details were kept deliberately sparse, reflecting Ray's preference for privacy and protection over disclosure. What is documented is his presence during prolonged hospital stays and his quiet persistence in moments where medicine offered few assurances. Those close to Ray recalled how sound became a different language during this period. He would sit beside the bed, fingers moving slowly across piano keys, playing familiar melodies at reduced tempo. Music meant not for audiences, but for comfort. The blindness that once defined his public narrative receded. In those rooms, it was irrelevant. What mattered was proximity, patience, and the act of staying. Ray Charles never turned the experience into testimony. He returned to work, toured, recorded, and performed, carrying grief without explanation. The loss did not soften his artistry, but it deepened the gravity of his interpretations. Songs that lingered longer, silences that spoke louder. Ray Charles died in 2004 at age 73. His legacy celebrates innovation and resilience. Yet beneath the accolades lies a quieter truth. A father who learned that genius cannot negotiate with fate, and that sometimes the most meaningful music is played for one listener, in a room where applause has no place. Billie Holiday. Billie Holiday's voice carried pain with unsettling honesty. She did not polish sorrow, she exposed it. Known for transforming personal anguish into art, Billie became one of the most influential vocalists of the 20th century. Still, even for someone so intimate with suffering, nothing prepared her for the loss that would hollow her private world. Billie took responsibility for a child, widely described in historical accounts as an adopted or foster son, who was diagnosed with leukemia and aggressive blood cancer. The illness advanced rapidly. Treatment options in the 1940s were limited, particularly for Black families navigating segregated healthcare systems. Billie poured her earnings into medical care, sustaining treatment as long as possible while continuing to perform to fund it. Witnesses described her exhaustion during this period: long nights, repeated hospital visits, and the strain of performing while carrying fear. When the child died, the loss struck with finality. Those close to Billie believed it marked a point of no return, accelerating the decline already fueled by addiction, legal pressure, and systemic abuse. Unlike her music, which invited listeners into vulnerability, Billie did not narrate this grief publicly. There were no interviews, no explanations. The silence was complete. Her performances afterward were heavier, more restrained, as if the space between words had widened. Billie Holiday died in 1959 at age 44. History remembers her as a tragic icon, but that label simplifies a harder truth. She was a caretaker in a hostile world, a woman who tried to protect a child with whatever resources she had. Her legacy is not only in the songs she left behind, but in the endurance she carried until there was nothing left to give. These legends shaped music, culture, and history, but when their children suffered, fame meant nothing. No award could stop illness. No applause could ease a parent's fear. Their stories remind us that pain does not discriminate, and greatness does not grant immunity from loss. Some chose silence, others chose sacrifice. All paid a price the world rarely acknowledges. Now we ask you, should these stories be remembered as part of their legacy, or kept private out of respect? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters here. This is Black Excellence Legends, where truth lives beyond the spotlight.